reparations must address the negative consequences of that wrong and repair the situation to the extent that you try to wipe out the effect of those negative consequences and reestablish the situation that in all probability would have existed if those crimes had never been perpetrated in the first place.
Welcome to Just a Conversation, the podcast where we talk about the topics that matter to you. I'm Fabian Belgrave, joined by
Sheila Morrow.
And today, we are diving into a topic that's deeply historical, deeply political, and deeply personal: reparations. What do we mean when we say the Caribbean is owed a debt? And how does that translate into action, not just words? Joining us are three powerful voices: Ambassador David Comissiong, cultural advocate Rodney and activist and historian Trevor Prescod, as we unpack the legacy and the fight for justice that continues today. All right, so we're talking reparations and what that means for us as Barbadians and Caribbean people. So let's dive right in. Ambassador Comissiong, reparations for the Caribbean. What is that looking like?
Well, the Caribbean people are owed reparations because of our history. Reparations is really a claim in international law. And it is a claim that emerges when a people have suffered a grievous wrong, in a criminal act in international law, typically genocide or a crime against humanity. And a crime against humanity is a case of murder, extermination, enslavement, and other grossly inhumane acts committed against a civilian population. And when we look at our history in Barbados and in the Caribbean, we see that for centuries, we were the victims, our ancestors were the victims of a European-imposed system of enslavement, the worst species of enslavement, chattel, the inhumane chattel slavery. And as a result of that experience, much damage was done to our people. We don't have to go into it, but tremendous loss of liberty, tremendous punishment, psychological damage, cultural damage. Many aspects of the damage that was done. And on the other hand, the entities that committed those crimes profited from the criminality. They went through a process of unjust enrichment, where they built their civilization, they built their wealth, but at the expense of the victimization, looting, and plundering of our people. And so, as a result of that history, we now have a case in international law and indeed in morality for compensation, for repair. So the principle involved in reparations is that where a wrong has been committed, reparations must address the negative consequences of that wrong and repair the situation to the extent that you try to wipe out the effect of those negative consequences and reestablish the situation that in all probability would have existed if those crimes had never been perpetrated in the first place. And so we are on a journey to establish the legitimacy of our claim and to secure reparations from those entities that committed the crime, namely the governments, the national governments of Western Europe that were involved in enslavement and genocide in the Caribbean, the monarchies, the royal families, the private companies, the religious institutions, the universities, the families, all of the entities that we can identify today that were implicated in those crimes.
What should reparations look like? And I am willing to hear answers from any of you. What should it look like?
Well, we would eventually get down in the conversation to how we will calculate and arrive at an answer to that question, which is a fundamental question that got to be answered. And we're working, still continue to work on looking at how we should present the case if it has to go to the international courts. But what David said initially about reparations, this is sanctioned by the UN. The decision to see slavery as a major crime against humanity, a severe crime, also derived out of the Durban Conference, as 2001. So it's not a Barbadian thing. It is wherever chattel slavery existed, there must be a case for reparations. The reparations itself is not exclusively money, but some form of compensation for the wrongs that have been done. For me, it is criminal wrongs. And I don't engage in the debate so much about the morality of it, because the morality of it provides an escape for minimum sums of compensation to be paid. It is a felony, so it's a severe act of crime. And the consequence of that crime we are experiencing today. The Caribbean, for example, and probably Black America, the African continent, even black people wherever they are, the quality of life that they live is significantly due to the experiences that they had during the period of slavery. I also believe, just like in the law courts, when we bring a charge against an individual, the generalization does not fully create the picture. And sometimes we talk about the history of slavery, but we don't want to give a clear description of some of the atrocities of the period, like what they did to us as human beings, not just dehumanize us by using a word, but things like how they stripped us in half in some cases when the masters was not satisfied with how we work, or if we looked at a female, or if we looked back at the master. People were put in syrup and placed in what we call an ant's nest, and they were eaten to death. They were put on the treadmill, and their bones were broken. I believe that if we are to fully sensitize people of why we feel the way that we feel, we have to go above the generalizations and let you understand what the details were. Mm-hmm. We know, as a result of research, we now process detailed evidence. Before, people even who talk about history and taught history were dealing with a lot of generalizations. Now we have lots of research, and the research done by our own.
So the evidence is there.
So the evidence is there.
I still want to jump in though and give another attempt at the answer to the question you posed. So I think it's fair to say that there are two major approaches as to what would the reparations look like. One approach is to do a financial calculation, and there have been some attempts to look at the African population. To look, for example, let's use the case of Barbados, to identify the African Barbadians who were enslaved on this island over multiple generations. We know the numbers that were involved. to look at the kind of damage that was inflicted on them, all that was done to them. And just as lawyers in a personal injury case, a normal personal injury case, will do a calculation and arrive at a monetary compensation, that has been done. So the most recent one is a study that was done by a group out of the United States called the Brattle Group. And they calculated that Barbados alone, for the damage done to our ancestors over that, near 250 year period, they calculated that we are owed something like close to $5 trillion. $5 trillion,
So if
right?
I could put
Let me just finish this point, though. So that is one approach, and that's an important approach. But the Caricom approach has been more, not so much to look simply at monetary compensation, but to look at repairing the damage done through a developmentalist approach. So the Caricom has this 10-point demand for reparations directed at the European governments. And it more focuses on developmental programs in the field, for example, health, education, technology transfer, repairing the cultural damage, etc., etc. But it does have a financial component as well. The other point to make is that the Caricom approach too doesn't only focus on the damage that was done to us as a specific population. It also focuses on the kind of international order that exists today, that emerged out of those centuries of enslavement and victimization, and still has built into it those discriminatory structures that still discriminate against us even up to today. So the Caricom approach to reparations is about, yes, compensation to a specific population group, but it is also about addressing the international economic, political and economic order, and saying that that order must be repaired as well, and repaired in the sense of being reconstructed, and so that it is made more fair and more supportive of black and brown countries and peoples. Over to you, Rodney.
Right. So I think I wanted to make a similar point to what David was making, and then expand on something else that kind of bothers me a little bit. But it was that, Caricom, I think Caricom found the balance in that the 10-point plan seeks to fix the human condition while also looking at some of the economic and the social damage that would have been done to us. And we always remind Barbadians that we have to think of where we would have been if we had gotten a better start economically. Imagine if we had gotten the chance to keep all the money and the wealth.
This is it.
That we would have, our ancestors would have built out from the enslaved period. We would have been able to build out in the same way that Britain and European countries would have been able to build out and develop their economies and develop their societies. So we are behind because they took all the wealth, enslaved our ancestors, and built out their own countries. So they got a head start. Where we are now left struggling with a debt situation that is almost like a pandemic. You can't seem to get rid of it. The other thing that is because we have to find a way to bring this situation in a way that Barbadian people understand it. And I think that's a battle that we continue to fight. Because I think ordinary Barbadians really have to try and understand this. And if you think about the 1661 slave code, I think this is something that we really should study. Because imagine today, if we were to look at this population today, and I were to consider you less than human, and I were to put all the conditions in place to strip every aspect of your humanity from you. Imagine. Just think about you being in that situation that our ancestors would have been in way back in the period of the enslavement. And that was what was done to human beings. They were stripped of their humanity. And, that's something that today still impacts us as a society.
Of course.
And therefore, that human condition of repairing the self really coming back to that proud African person that we were before we were stripped off our humanity. I think this is one of the most critical things. Because we can get any money, but we don't fix ourselves, we're not going anywhere. And I think one of the more critical conditions to fix us as a people, so that we stop doing the things, the harm to each other that was done to us and our ancestors.
It's a journey of healing.
300 years ago.
Yes.
Exactly. We can't keep repeating, because, at some point in time, the European people understood that slavery had to finish. Physical slavery had to finish. So they then started to impose a psychological way of keeping it in place without they maintaining the physical bonds. And that is the aspect of the slavery. That's psychological slavery that's still in us today, the way we treat each other, the way we behave to each other, the way we look down on each other. So we didn't need a slave master anymore when we are enslaving ourselves in our, we continue with the conditions of slavery in the way in which we treat our brothers without the slave master telling us to do. So for me, that is one of the more critical and important conditions.
And yet the slave master was compensated, which is in itself is maddening.
Exactly.
But how do we as a people heal ourselves? Do we have the
before you go on to that though, Sheila just made a very critical point there that we shouldn't just let it slip by. When the Europeans came, as Rodney said, the Europeans were ultimately forced to abolish the system of slavery. And they were forced to abolish it because of the resistance from our ancestors. Our ancestors kept on resisting. They kept on staging rebellions like the Buster Rebellion in Barbados in 1816, and of course the most famous rebellion of them all, the Haitian Revolution, right, of 1791. So they were forced to come to the conclusion that this simply could not continue with this system. It was proven to be too difficult, and they had to bring it to an end. But how did they go about doing that? They said, well, if we have to bring it to an end, what we have to do, we have to calculate the labor value of the existing generation of enslaved people. We have to calculate what would their labor be valued at, and then we have to compensate, not the enslaved, but we have to compensate the slave master for losing his property in terms of this labor value. And so the British determined that the generation of enslaved people in existence in 1833, the labor value of that generation was 47 million pounds. And what they would do, they would pay the slave masters 20 million pounds in cash. And the other 27 million pounds, they would require the formerly enslaved people, they've quote unquote given them freedom, but they will require them for the next 6 years to work off that 27 million pounds by giving free labor, a certain quantity of free labor every week to the former slave master. And I should tell you that 47 million pounds in today's values, you're talking something like 170 billion, 170 billion pounds. And that was only for the labor value. That had nothing to do with the loss of freedom.
Yes.
That had nothing to do with all the punishments, all the damage done. And that was just for one generation. So just to make the point that we are still grappling with the tremendous injustice of that when they came to abolish slavery, it never occurred to them that the formerly enslaved deserved some compensation for all that was taken from them, all the damage was done to them. Their morality could only go so far as to say, no, it is the property owner, the so-called property owner, who must be compensated for the loss.
Yes.
For the loss of his property.
But that same point that you are making, they only finished paying in 2015.
That's correct.
I mean, that's a long time for something from 1833.
And the people who were victims were not even conscious that they were still paying off that debt.
Correct.
So it says something to us. And I think the previous question you asked, how do we get our people to understand this discussion on reparation? You probably didn't put it in that way. It means that education is important. If the people never understood the struggles that they went through, or their forebears went through, it's going to be very difficult for them to understand why today what we see emerging out of the society are voices asking for reparations. There's a level of ignorance on what reparation constitutes, even among so-called intellectuals. And we are still having a whole set of intellectuals arguing, is reparations reparatory justice? I am one of the people who will argue that all the time, that reparations is not reparatory justice. But then you hear people who are supposed to be the educators using the word without in their conversation having a clear definition of what they mean. It is a little more painful to hear the debate sometimes on reparations and on reparatory justice. I find that when people start to talk about it, we fall into the ambit of morality. And most people who we're discussing things with are a little more comfortable talking about reparatory justice. But reparations is what Aristide called for. That caused Aristide to be forced into exile.
That's a subject we have to touch on. We have to touch on that one part.
Yes.
Haiti and France.
Right. And Haiti, for example, I know that some people give a lot of credit to what the British did prior to 1834. But the British did nothing out of conscience. It was the Haitian Revolution. If you look at the parliamentary debates prior to 1833, when they begin to talk about education and the levels of education, how much subjects they should teach and what the 3 main subjects should be, you will see in those discussions that they were saying, are you going to wait until these people do to us what the black people, the African people did to the French in Haiti? That was the level of the debate.
So I would like to posit a different, not a different perspective, but I like to challenge thinking sometimes. I would beg to answer the question. 'Cause I think one of the things in the reparations push, reparations has to be on encompassing of several things. And one of the things is to ensure that slavery don't happen again. And somehow, I think we believe that slavery can't happen again.
I tell people this all the time. It
Whether
can't
in
happen
some form or
again.
fashion.
You
And history is a very interesting thing,
Pay attention.
Yeah, when we think about 1945 and the Second World War, we run and we established the UN so to ensure that we don't have to go back and endure that type of pain again, where one nation trying to dominate the rest and cause significant loss. That's why we set the UN. Just running up the UN. Ask ourselves today if it's working. Is it working? What is to stop a condition like slavery or some nation in quest for wealth and with the power doing what they did to our ancestors in this modern time? And, so part of reparations has to be a consciousness for us to ensure and fight that this condition don't ever happen again in some modern form, in some new way. Because, while we might be looking at the historical conditions, we might be missing the present and what's happening now. And when we look at the world and what's happening, the people with the money and the power is who controlling how things should go. And sometimes we have little say in the way in which the world is, in the way in which certain things are played out. And we, we really got to be very careful. And so that, for me, one of the things I think wrapped up in all what I'm trying to say is, one of the things we got to ensure is that we have to ensure the condition of slavery and the aspects of it, even if it's one simple aspect of it, does not bear its head again in this modern time.
No, I go back to the original point I made. The Caricom concept of reparations is that a component of reparations is to address the currently existing, inherently unjust and exploitative international order. So we are conscious of this. We are conscious that the world that we live in today, as I said, to repeat, has its roots in those centuries of enslavement and anti-black victimization, and still bears the imprint of that culture. And so part of our reparation campaign is to address that. And we could look at that in many aspects. One aspect that has emerged quite recently is our claim for climate justice, because we are more and more making the case that the global warming and the climate crisis that we experience today has its roots in those centuries of enslavement and victimization, in the sense that
The Industrial Revolution.
the Industrial Revolution started. The European Industrial Revolution started in islands like Barbados back in the 1640s. In the 1640s,
Sugar.
there were no factories in England. If you wanted to find a factory, you had to come to Barbados, right? You know, the integrated sugar plantation, the fields of cane to grow the cane stalks, the windmill to grind the cane stalks to produce cane juice, and then the boiling house or sugar factory to put that cane juice through various heating and chemical processes to produce sugar, molasses, and rum. That's the beginning of Europe's industrial civilization. And that structure in the Caribbean made so much wealth for Britain and other European countries that they were able to invest that wealth in developing their industrial society that went on to generate all the greenhouse gases that have caused the global warming. So our reparations campaign is actually multifaceted. And it has to be multifaceted, and that is part of it, addressing all those international structural injustices and demanding not just repair and compensation, but demanding reformed structures that make the whole system more just, and therefore create a condition where it will be very difficult, if not impossible, if we do the reforms correctly, for there ever to be a repetition of the systemic injustice of enslavement.
Is that a real consideration? Because people in power don't often give up power that easy.
Nothing without a struggle, my friend. We understand that.
Well, that's going to be a
Frederick
huge
Douglass says
uphill
what?
struggle.
Was the phrase that power concedes nothing
Correct.
without a demand and a struggle. So
well, I think that you can need a bit more than a demand and a struggle to get these powerful nations to say, all right, we aren't going to
we need a nuclear
intrude
bomb?
upon you. No.
A nuclear weapon?
More definitely not. But
but listen. We take a lot of inspiration from the anti-apartheid struggle. You remember there was something called apartheid South Africa that was in place, from the early 20th century, where they had this terrible system of oppression of black people in South Africa. And there was the South Africans led but what became an international movement against apartheid. And
Yes.
that international movement was able ultimately to bring down the apartheid system. So we take a lot of comfort
That's
and
a lot of
confidence
comfort
from that
you're
if
trying
we,
to take.
Yeah, but the point is we understand that it is a struggle. And we understand that we're
Correct.
struggling against very powerful forces. And we also understand that we likewise have to build a formidably powerful campaign. So that is why right now we are reaching out to allies. For example, we are reaching out to the African Union. We are building, when Caricom launched its campaign in 2013, the reparations idea was at a relatively low ebb. But what Caricom did actually resuscitated interest. And I think after 10 years of effort on the part of Caricom, we now see that we have a global reparations movement. And we in Caricom now, we are being very deliberate in building a very strong coalition. So the next phase in the building process for us is a partnership with our continental African brothers and sisters. And that will take a major step forward in September of this year, when we hold the second the African Union Caricom Heads of Government Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and reparations will be frontally on the agenda of that conference.
Let me ask a question. I'm putting it to everyone. When we became independent, when we broke away, at that point, wouldn't it have been prudent to ask for some form of reparations then?
We did.
And what happened?
And it was rejected. Virtually all of the independence leaders that went up to Britain to negotiate independence, whether Eric Williams, whether Alexander Bustamante, did raise with the British that they owe a debt to the Caribbean people. Many, Sir Arthur, and even before then, Sir Arthur Lewis raised it in the 1930s. Richard B. Moore, Winter Crawford, all of them raised it. Winter Crawford raised it with the Moyne Commission. Winter Crawford sent a memorandum to the Moyne Commission in 1938 outlining what Britain owed to the Barbadian people because of centuries of, as Rodney said, our people worked and all of the fruits of their labor siphoned off, to British families and British institutions and the British government. So our ancestors have always raised the demand for reparations, but that demand has never been met. It is up to us now, who are in a more powerful position than previous generations. We have our own governments, our own countries, our ambassadors. It is up to us now to mobilize the kind of force that is required to make this thing successful.
I think the point is, and it's clear that this is not going to be an easy ask and a give. This is going to be an ongoing, continuous battle that is going to have to be fought at many different levels. I think one of the most significant things is that building of an alliance across the world globally, because as a region we don't have the might by ourselves to take on some of the bigger forces, and I think that global alliance is absolutely important. And in fact, we are not the only ones that were affected by slavery. Africa as a nation, and there are other nations that were affected by it as well, and therefore we have to find the relevant alliances to be able to go after this, and we have to be practical in that. Somebody's not going to give you something just because you ask for it. It's not going to be easy as that. So we have to be prepared. I think we are prepared to battle, but not forever. This would have been like 50-something years since independence, since that first act that David spoke about. And, we have to be prepared to continue to battle this and get wins along the way. It may not that you get one big win, but I always believe you can get some small wins, and you get them as you go along, because in the 10-point plan that Caricom laid out, there are different aspects of wins that we are looking for as a region in terms of repair, and I think we can try to build them out as we go along, and find a way to bring that process in a way to help this generation and future generations. I think that's one of the things too that in our messaging has to be important. This battle now that's being undertaken by this generation is for this generation and future generations, so that the younger people of today, they're the ones who really should be interested in it. We're not going to get any benefits from reparations. We may not be wrong. We may just be the people to lay the foundation for how this battle should evolve. but we may not get anything from it. So the repair to our economies, the build out of our healthcare system, the repair to our educational system, the new social development projects that we may have on the ground that see our people growing and evolving, we may not benefit from all of that. You know, we may just be the ones who, so the present generation, young generation, are the ones who should really find a way to buy into this conversation and buy into this movement, because they are the will be the benefactors of any reparatory justice.
Rodney, I understand that line, but I still believe that we have a duty to the unborn, that we have to do all that we can.
Of course.
So that all the descendants before us and after us of slavery benefit from the changes. We know that we can't go to the ultimate, but we have a duty to make sure that it happens. And even though on many occasions we get the impression that it is most unlikely, we just can't give up.
Can't give up.
We can't give up. And the other thing that I think we have to look at is there are always counter forces. And they've implied about the mechanisms that they put in place that inhibit us from making the progress that we know we can make. You just look and see how I didn't want to bring these things in, but you just look and see how we have had discussions about how the British Party would probably react after the elections. In the initial stage of the elections, we got the impression that there was a win in the British government who was strongly supportive of reparations. And then what the British Prime Minister said. And we have had many cases like that sometimes when governments and the opposition having discussions, the opposition says something because there's a favorable pocket that want to hear that music, and they give you the impression that they will dance positively to the music, but then when they get office, you're coming up against Britain. The same thing happened, in my view, in 1966. I don't think the population was ready for it. They could not be ready for it in 1966, and we're 2025. Now saying that, yes, we asked for it. They were asking for it all through the 1930s for these changes to be made. But only a small pocket of the people were conscious and understood the seriousness of what the leaders were talking then, that were not in central government at itself, but they were asking for reparations. The word in the West Indies is almost like a new word coming to the dictionary. Reparations. The only thing we knew about reparations in the last 30 years or so is if we're talking about the struggles between Germany and the Jews. Even though, how are you going to get reparations? People still answer those questions.
Trevor.
So there's a need for an intensive educational program to pull us out of this.
Just permit me to be a little bit more optimistic here now.
I'm not saying not
No, hold on. I just want the record to reflect that we are in fact making progress, and that in fact there are several European companies, universities, families that have acknowledged their guilt, have acknowledged the fact that the wealth that they enjoy today came out of those crimes of enslavement, and have made some effort to make repair. So yes, a good example is the University of Glasgow, that did its own research, recognized that a lot of the wealth it enjoys as a university today comes out of enslavement. It entered into a program, what they call a reparatory program, with the University of the West Indies, right? Then you have families, you have a number of British families, you have an organization now called the Heirs of Slavery. These are families that have acknowledged that their family and British establishment families have that history. Where we have not made the appreciable progress that we want to make is with the national governments. So we can actually see where we have made progress with families, with universities, with companies. Where we have not yet made progress is with the governments of Western Europe. We had an optimistic signal with the Dutch government about 2 or 3 years ago, where the Dutch Prime Minister came and made a public apology about slavery, and the Dutch King followed up. But then there was a change of government, as Trevor said. And the new administration that came in repudiated what the previous government had done. So we recognize we do have a serious problem with the national governments. Caricom wrote to the governments of Western Europe in 2016, telling them that we had launched this reparations claim against them, outlining the history to them, and inviting them to come and sit with us and discuss how they can contribute to repairing the damage that was done. They all responded, but they all responded in a very non-committal way. So that's the governments of Britain, Spain, Portugal, France, Holland, and Denmark. Since then, Caricom has added additional research has been done. We have added Germany, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland. So right now, Caricom is actually pursuing reparations against 10 Western European nations, and we are pursuing reparations both for the genocide against the indigenous people of the Caribbean, as well as the enslavement of our African ancestors. Caricom, the most recent developments in Caricom is that we have now developed the initial Caricom 10-point plan into a full-fledged reparations manifesto. So this document is currently before the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations. That's the Committee of Prime Ministers that has the overall control of our reparations campaign, and the chair is Barbados Prime Minister Motley. And Caricom has also come up with a draft negotiating strategy. In other words, we are putting together a team of reparations negotiators and a number of principles or a methodology for negotiating reparations. So we are very clear. You know, there was this talk about a year ago about the Codrington College and the British Society for the Propagation of the Gospel coming to Barbados and doing some project with the Codrington Trust here. And the Barbados National Reparations Commission was very clear to say, look, what you're doing is not reparations. It's a social justice project. We applaud it. It's a good social justice project, but it does not qualify as reparations. So Caricom is now what the Barbados Task Force did, just verbally. Caricom is now putting that into policy, that there will be a strategy, there will be certain principles to be applied, and so wherever we are negotiating a reparations claim, these principles will apply. So it's not a question of anybody just jumping up and saying, we give you something and we call that reparations. No.
Yeah.
So we want to be very clear about that. So yes,
In
you
other
know,
words,
so it's a difficult task ahead,
you're
but
making a
we are making progress, and we are moving forward in a very organized way.
We're making clear distinctions between what is aid, what is a grant, and what is reparation.
Very important, yes.
Right? So you don't just discuss something with private entities and make a decision and say, there's reparations you give it to Barbados. The government agency must be at the center
Right.
of the discussion.
I'm glad you said that because Rodney, you're there. What is happening within your department, within your office, where these things are concerned? We understand it from Caricom. Tell me about Barbados.
Well, a lot of the work we focus on is really desensitization. like I said, Caricom has its work to do, and if you just listen to Brass Stacks or any other program where ordinary Barbadians are engaged in, a lot of what Caricom may be doing, it mean anything to the ordinary Barbadian.
Correct.
If ordinary Barbadian says, so
How
what
much
I
money
gotta do
they
with
getting?
me, how much I can get. You know, that's the conversation you can get from ordinary people in communities on the streets, and you know. So I think the most important aspect of our work is to really bring these issues to the people in a way that makes it easy for them to understand how they're connected to what's happening in that political level with the people on the ground. Caricom has its political work to do, and I think we have the people's business work to undertake
Right.
at the level of the people, so the people understand their stake in it. They understand how this historical thing is impacting them in this present time, and like I said before, in the way in which we treat each other, and the things that we must do to ensure we don't go back to that state of mental, psychological, and physical conditioning where we brutalize one another, and but that we really move to a point of self-freedom and self-independence. And so a lot of our work has really been around two things: sensitization, and then built out in other ways. We've been pushing the whole concept of memorialization as an important aspect of that, because if we have concepts of our own self, and we show Barbadians how to appreciate themselves, I think that's an important start in the aspect of self-repair. So when we talk about memorialization, what we're doing, we are building out these what we call community monuments, where we align community people to celebrate their own. And it would have started with things like the removal of the Nelson Monument,
Oh, that was good.
replacing it with the Family Monument, the renaming of the Clement Pierce Claim, the area there to the Golden Square, the renaming of the bus terminal. So
Right.
we started these processes, and we expanded it from national spaces to also community spaces, where Barbadians see things being renamed after people they can identify with, and that's the beginning of the self-repair. So if you see a park and a name after, say, the Raw Clark Park, he was a former national Olympian, then you can say, well, I know he, and you can build inspiration from that, rather than some old colonial name that you're not, you don't have any connection with. And therefore the memorialization project is one of those things where we're looking to do just that,
Okay.
to rename, to replace, to repair.
That's fine,
Yeah.
good
See,
and awesome.
all-
But hold, excuse me a minute. But if I am on the streets and I hear people talking about reparations, all I want to know is where my money,
How much for you? Yeah.
where it is,
So again,
when they can get it.
Fabian, so that's
How
that's one of the things we are trying to build out in the sensitization. That look, this thing is not two things. It's not just about money, and the other thing is that the money is not meant to be split among each individual. It just don't make sense.
Well, I ain't interested then.
Right. The money,
I ain't
I
interested.
think reparations claim is about building out institutions. And I think the way how the governments is looking at it, and David can correct me or Trevor if I'm wrong, is that governments are saying, look, we're going to take this money and rebuild the institutions that were broken down by colonialism and slavery. So we're going to rebuild the educational institution in a way that benefits us. We're going to repair our healthcare system. We're going to repair our economies, our economic structures. And I think that's the way. So you're rebuilding the national framework in a way then that it draws down and helps the people at the individual and the household
With
level.
better
Because
programs.
it makes more sense. Because imagine if we were to give everybody a
Bentley, a
$50,000.
Lambo.
At the end of the day, you're not solving the problems. You're just back to square one. So it's not about putting money in each individual people's pocket. I mean, if that can be done, I'm sure there would be a way to do it. But I think the first order of business is to repair the institutional frameworks.
I agree with you. I agree with you
Let me make
totally.
the point here. What is happening at the highest levels of the CRC is not divorced from what is happening on the ground. We also recognize that during the period of enslavement, there was a deculturalization program, and therefore what Rodney's talking about is very much of addressing that deculturalization program. The murals that we have also depict history and give you some idea of the whole evolutionary development of our people over a number of years. So, Caricom, the 10-point plan has an element related to education and culture. And in my view, when you look at that, it looks that culture is very much a part of the educational program itself. So there's no rigid division between what is education and what is culture. So what they're doing is the enlightenment of Barbadian people, and I'm assuming that across the region, a similar thing will be happening there. So I would say that Caricom is divorced from the realities of what is happening in the local community, because whatever we do here has to fit into the framework of what the CRC has agreed upon. You get me on that point.
I totally understand
Right.
you. I totally understand you, and I am for that.
All three of us, we have a responsibility to our people, not only our people here, and it overlaps into the other territories wherever black people are. We have to give them that kind of enlightenment, because we have to remove the ignorance. If a man really believes that any place in the world would pay reparations to even a small population like ours, that very close to 300 persons, they can't leave out Barbadians that gone away 6 months ago. You're going to pay them too. You know, it really requires intensive education.
I'm glad you said that.
Yes.
So-
we have to. It has to be a mass movement, Fabian. We will only be successful in our reparations campaign if we are able to develop it into a mass
Bring
movement.
people along.
Therefore, it cannot just be David Comissiong, the Trevor Prescod, Rodney Grant. We have to bring our people with us. And how do we bring our people with us? We have to give them a deep and profound understanding of their history, that they have, so that they have an emotional connection to the reparations issue. Now, this is a book that I wrote some years ago called "It's the Healing of the Nation: The Case for Reparations." And let me just quote this little passage about the sacredness of this history, right? And I'm quoting: "Most plantation owners treated their slaves with casual but unpremeditated cruelty. To whip a child, to send a man off to the treadmill to tread until the skin came off his legs, or to keep an old woman in stock for days without food. These and other acts were perpetrated in the ordinary course of the day. Occasionally, however, a planter would exceed the acceptable limits. Edward Huggins, a Nevis planter, had been plagued by a series of runaways. He caught and drove 20 slaves to the center of town. There, with his 2 sons and 2 practiced whippers, Huggins flogged the runaways, up to 365 lashes for the men and 291 for the women. Arthur Hodge of Tortola was found guilty of killing, either personally or under his orders, nearly 100 blacks by cruelty, torture, and whippings. 3 of his slaves, Tom, Prosper, and Cuffy, had been stretched out on the ground and whipped continuously for over an hour until they died. Boiling water had been poured down the throat of the plantation cook, and a hot iron had been placed in another's mouth. Young slaves had been beaten, dipped in boiling liquid, nearly drowned, then hung up and horse whipped. You understand what we're talking about? You're talking about hell on earth.
Absolutely.
You're talking about the world's first concentration camps. The world's first concentration camps were not in Nazi Germany. They were in places like Barbados in the 1640s and 50s. So it is the profundity of that history that we have to make our people aware of. So they have this emotional connection to the history and to the reparations claim that comes out of that history. Because if after we know that history, we don't feel that we have a duty to demand justice and compensation, to demand some acknowledgement that our ancestors were not some wild, barbaric, savage creatures, but were human beings made in the likeness and image of Almighty God. If we, after we know that history, we don't feel that we have that duty to stand up and represent, that history and demand acknowledgement and justice, then something will be wrong with us.
Gentlemen.
So it all starts with the education. And through the education, we will develop the mass movement that will make the victory of reparations a guarantee.
I think that we through the entire conversation, we exclude the indigenous people. And there's a call in the last few years
Genocide.
for the indigenous people to be included in the request for reparations. Those indigenous people who, when the British first came, they recognized that there were homes on the land, but there were no people. They claimed that. We have evidence now from St. Vincent, Dominica, and everything that many of those people escaped. Acts of genocide occurred and wipe out the whole indigenous population, and they are now making representation to the CRC that they must be included in any call for reparation against Europe, that is Portugal, British, or who. So that is an element of a debate. I hope at some time we have an opportunity to have that discussion.
Of course, I hope so.
Yeah,
We can
yeah.
continue this discussion hopefully another time. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for bringing some level of clarity to what indeed is a very deeply emotional, difficult, but important conversation to have. Mr. Grant, I'm going to allow you maybe a few seconds to give your final thoughts.
Very brief. All I would say is identity precedes participation. And it's linked to, what David was talking about. I totally agree. The education is important. And a big part of our work has to be about how we educate our Barbadian population about this particular issue. It must mean something to them. And if it don't mean something to them, then therefore we losing part of the fight. It must be that mass-based movement. So they have to identify so they can participate.
Of course. Thank you very much, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
For sure. It was a pleasure. I give Fabian some brief about coming. I'm so glad I come.
Thanks for listening to Just a Conversation. If this episode made you think, reflect, or ask questions, then we've done our job. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Just search GIS Barbados. Share this episode, start your own conversation, and help keep the momentum going.